Today we have Chief Jason Malloy with us from Newport Police Department. And Chief Malloy has been with the Newport Police Department since December of 1994. He's worked various assignments in the patrol division to include field training officer, traffic officer, major crash team, and drug recognition expert. He was promoted through the ranks from officer to sergeant in 2004. Sergeant to lieutenant in 2010, and interim chief of police in October 2016. In July 17th of 2017, he was appointed chief of police, where he's been ever since. So welcome, Jason. And Chief Malloy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Freddie. So a little concerned where you got all that information. It's kind of like stalker behavior. I'm assuming Miranda had something to do with that.
I think it was on your city website, but whoever's responsible for that.
Perfect. So police reform, kind of a global term. We're not really looking at the fact that we're fixing something that's broken, but when you look at this at a national scale, Oregon and Newport couldn't be left out. And the fact that something needed to be done in light of recent events between Ferguson, Minneapolis, I think it all just came to a head. And the public requires and demands transparency, which we fully support. And we'll talk about what happened locally with the state of Oregon, is that there was 6 different legislative bills that went through the last emergency session. And a lot of those had a direct impact on the Newport Police and things we were able to implement. Actually, even prior to them going into law, we already had some measures in place. But I'll just go through the list really quick. The disciplinary matrix, which is Senate Bill 1604, ultimately talks about frequently members of law enforcement will do something where they get in trouble, they get disciplined. And due to due process, they have the right to a hearing, they have the right to challenge it, they have the right to go to an arbitrator. And I'm sure many of you have heard about arbitrators overruling discipline, police officers getting their job back, getting back pay, whatever it may be. The disciplinary matrix takes that away, and it makes the final decision by the city or the department the final decision. But to do that, we have to have a disciplinary matrix or guidelines. So it's not arbitrary, we're not making things up. It's something that we're working on at the state level through our insurance carrier, through our legal team. So we see something coming in this in the next few months. We don't have a definitive answer, except that we do have to move forward. The state did create a joint committee on transparent policing and use of force, which is definitely needed. It's members of the community, police chiefs, sheriffs. They're going to provide a lot of information based upon public input and what do we need to ensure law enforcement remains transparent and that law enforcement's doing what the public wants, not what we want. One of the big ones that, in light of the Minneapolis event, is the police chokehold ban. The Newport Police already has a ban on a chokehold. We do have certain instances where we can use a carotid hold, but we have updated our policies to eliminate those as a general use of force. They do still apply at a state, national, and in a local level when an officer is justified in using deadly force. And so ultimately what that comes down to is if our life or somebody else's life is in immediate danger and we have to make an end, is the only time we're going to use that. Other than that, we have put out countless trainings, countless memos, countless directives on when an officer can and cannot ultimately touch somebody's neck. The big one that I think we're going to see probably the most within the state and definitely in Newport is going to be the duty to intervene and report, which is another House bill. And simply stated, what that says is if an officer is doing something wrong, another officer that witnessed it is required to report it. If the officer that's witnessed it hasn't reported it, they can be disciplined, they can be held accountable, ultimately for the same actions that the officer did. And so this isn't just on physical force, this is on conduct, this is on an officer making any decision based upon any of the protected classes. So again, we've put out a lot of training bulletins on this, again, more directives and making sure all of our staff know at no point can they turn a blind eye. If one of our staff is doing something wrong, as much as you would like to see it reported, I also want to see it reported. The statewide officer suspension and revocation database is now actually up and running. That's run by the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. That's the police academy that governs everything that we do. They're the ones that issue our certificates to make sure that we're compliant with all of our training and our certificates. And prior to the new law, these were records that were open to the public, but they did not have names attached. So if an officer did something so egregious that they lost their certification, were terminated, no longer able to be a police officer in the state of Oregon, they were listed as Officer A or Officer B. That's now listed as the actual officer's name. So there's a database where unfortunately we have some of our former members that are on there that did something so egregious, they were terminated and they will never be police officers in the state of Oregon again, which is good. The final House bill is restrictions on the use of tear gas. Now, again, this is something at the state level. I don't know of a time in my 28 years where I've actually seen tear gas used in person. We don't even have it here. We have access to it through another agency, but there's restrictions on it. And if you've been watching any of the news, you can see there is quite the system that has to be done, such as in Portland. They have to declare a riot. They have to warn that it's going to be happening. It doesn't just happen like it did a couple of months ago. So those are the big things at the national or at the state level that is happening. But locally, we've taken it one step further. We've had a couple demonstrations. Some are demonstrations, some are protests. I haven't quite figured out the difference yet. But a group of people coming together to voice their opinion and voice their cause. And we've heard those, we've listened to those. There was a group of 3 former Newport high school students that are, I believe, sophomores and juniors now in college that had just started asking questions, and they got our city council's attention. And so we've had a couple of meetings with them where they've had a presentation, and they're talking about making sure that our underrepresented, such as our Latino community, our LGBTQ community, that they're also represented and have a voice. And again, this is fully supported. And I think I've said, since my chief's interview from day one, and even under the Mark Miranda days, is, I really think that our community has to be involved in our police department as much as our police department's involved in our community. I can assume what it is that our community wants, but that's not going to get us very far. So I think having community input is really important. How does our public want to be policed? How do they want to see our police department? There's certain things, that we really can't. I've heard discussions such as, we'd like to have all locals never receive a ticket. They can drive as fast as they want. Well, that is great if you're a local, really something that we can't do, we can't support. We can't target only tourists or something. So, but there's something else called 8 Can't Wait. And it's a national campaign that's been around for a while. And the ultimate, it is to reduce harm reduction to the community, to have transparency, to have accountability. Those are the banning of chokeholds, requiring de-escalation, which is something that we do. We have policy by, and I'll talk about our accreditation here in a little bit. And I'll use Mark Miranda's name a lot when I talk about that. But de-escalation is really important. It's like anything, probably in any one of your businesses or your lives, things evolve. And law enforcement's evolved over the last 25 years. We no longer storm in like stormtroopers, break up something, take everybody to jail and go home. Now it is, we want voluntary compliance. We want people to do things because it's the right thing to do. And now when they don't, we do have options such as arrest or using force, whatever be needed. But we also are training our officers more diligently now in de-escalation, of taking a few extra moments to talk to somebody, trying to convince them that it is the right thing to do, that it is the best thing to do to stop what they're doing. And there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of things that have shown that when officers use proper de-escalation techniques, less force is used, less people are hurt, there's less long-term damage, both with not only the person, but also the officer. So we want to ensure that that's happening. One of
It's hard to feel for them when the guys got it anywhere else, but what was delivered to the site.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob's delivered more asphalt, I think.
That's important.
And nothing has marked it.
Hopefully it's to the police cruisers, right?
Let me know if you understand that, man.
We do have some potholes. The other one is requiring a warning before shooting. This is something that you try to do, but again, you can't say never, never say always. There's times that we just don't have the ability to do that. It is something we do want to warn. I mean, we warn somebody before we're going to tase them. We warn them before generally they're going to be handcuffed. We tell people so they know what's going to happen. We require to exhaust all alternatives before using some kind of deadly force. Again, that is our goal, and that's how we train. But anybody that knows about law enforcement is not always an option. The duty to intervene, we already have in place. The ban shooting at moving vehicles, we already have in place. Comprehensive reporting, we're already doing that. The one that requiring the use of force continuum, and if anybody's ever looked at the 8 Can't Wait or what the force continuum is, back in the day, and we'll refer to that as when I started or when Chief Miranda was probably around his 20th year in career, we had a force continuum, and it had 6 steps. And we started with the first level, which was just us showing up in uniform, and it progressed all the way up through the use of deadly force. About 12 years ago, Oregon changed that and went away from the force continuum and went with a reasonable standard. Well, there's a push to bring the force continuum back. And again, this is being handled at the state level because they're the ones that monitor, certify, and do all of our training. And so there is a state work group that is looking at redefining our force continuum, redefining the force that an officer can use, when it's appropriate, how to apply it, and what the required training is. So those are just kind of the snapshot. And I know I'm going pretty quick, but I think when I talked to Richard O'Hearn, he said, yeah, you've got a few minutes, and I'm not sure what that meant. So, but when we talk about the police department, I could probably keep you guys here all day because I really like it. I like talking about us. But the thing I'll pretty much close with before Chief Miranda decides he said he's going to hammer me with questions, is our accreditation. And Newport Police Department's an accredited agency through the Oregon Accreditation Alliance. And we've been accredited since, oh, I should have looked at this one, 2013, I believe, was our first year. We are now, and it is every 3 years we become accredited, and we just had our 3rd award. So we've now done it 3 times. We're working on our 4th one now. And I'll actually read kind of why an agency should be accredited and what the benefit of that is. But the law enforcement accreditation system establishes a uniform set of best practices for police agencies that are consistent on an international scale, measurable, verified by an independent body as to compliance, and creates an accountability to the community, elected policymakers, and the line officers who are performing the day-to-day work. Within the law enforcement standards of best practices are compliance requirements dealing with life, health, safety, and high liability exposures. And so what that means is there's over 100 standards that we not only say we do, but we're able to prove that we do so that we can meet the accreditation standards. That helps with our professionalism, it helps with our accountability, and we don't just say that we're doing something. If somebody asks to prove it, we're able to prove it also. And we do that through actions. And so it was a proud accomplishment for us to be able to achieve under Chief Miranda, and then again being recertified or getting our reaccreditation, and then being able to do that for the 3rd time even after Chief Miranda left. It was something important enough to our department that not only I wanted to keep it going, but our officers had done a lot of work over the years to be able to say we were doing certain things, and so that the public really helps with a lot of public trust and accountability. And our officers, when Chief left and I had a department meeting with all of our staff, I had asked their opinion. Well, I knew what my answer was. They all agreed and supported the fact that we continue with accreditation. So it makes me feel good that our officers like the accountability, that they want the transparency, and that they're buying off on everything that it is we're selling. So the benefit for that is we have a professional police department, and also with that is because we're human and we make mistakes, we do have accountability measures for that. And accreditation helps that with it. Our policy manual helps out with it. And I think just the overall support of the community helps with it. So kind of really what I have in a nutshell. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them or make up the answer.
I have a question. I'm Ursula Marinelli. I work at the hospital in the foundation office. About body cams, what's the policy at Newport Police regarding body cams on officers?
So we have body cams. We were actually the first agency in the county to have body cams, and we spend a lot of money on them. They're all HD. All of our officers are required to wear them. They're required to activate them. We've defined any law enforcement contact. That had a lot of room for interpretation by our officers, and kind of in light of recent events, as we've changed our policy to ultimately, if they're outside of their car or if they are talking to anybody, is to have their camera. Yes, it costs a lot to have the storage, but you know, it really, the times have changed, and I'm sure that Jeff Buckley can probably also talk to this, and Jeff Outerkirk can also talk to this, is times have changed when it used to just be an officer's word about what had happened. And having the video evidence, having the video conduct, it's come to a time also where when our officers know they're being watched and know they're being recorded, they generally just act and perform a little better. And I actually had one of the students say, well, it's sad that an officer has to have a camera to conduct themselves a little bit better. I never really thought about it like that. I agree, but it really does help with professionalism, and it really does help paint a picture of what happened. So long answer, yes, we have them. Yes, they're required to wear them. And it's pretty, when an officer's camera goes down, they don't go in the field without one. It's kind of like becoming a computer in our cars. We get a replacement, we do whatever we can.
Jason, how's your budget?
Budget's terrible. The best way to say that is the city had a little over $1 million structural budget deficit going into the budget process, so we knew we were going to be having some cuts. The COVID-19 crisis added, kind of doubled our crisis, so I think we ended up around $2.4 million short in our overall budget. The police department is one of the largest departments within the city, so we did have, unfortunately, had quite a bit of hit. We had a little over a $600,000 cut in our budget to last year. And what that meant is we lost 3 full-time police officer positions, our parking officer, and half of my assistants. So we lost 4.5 positions with that. When we lose our positions, it's then up to me and our administrative team is how do we deploy our staff to the best needs of the city. And unfortunately, the very tough decision we had to make this year was to cut our school resource officer. Extremely valuable position, pages and pages of just positive what it does for the community and what it does for the schools. And I know John knows this. He was instrumental in helping us get our SRO and the agreement we had with the district. But we had to weigh the balance of the needs of our 10,500 residents and 50,000 visitors over the needs of the school, and it was a really tough position. So there's been a lot of reasons. There's been a lot of discussion on our school resource officer, that we lost it due to budget, that we've lost it due to performance, that we've lost it due to some of the movements. The ultimate truth is it strictly was a budget decision.
Any other questions?
A concern, not really a question, but a concern. And I live east of Newport by John Knight Road, and continually these homeless are walking Highway 20 in camo clothes, and they're walking out in the lane of traffic. And I don't know whose jurisdiction it is or if there's a remedy to it. There's several camps out in that area. And just wondering if Chief Malloy, he has any comment on that.
I can tell you that our homelessness situation in Newport is not unique to Newport. It's prevalent everywhere. The city actually created a city-sponsored homelessness task force that met multiple times over the course of about 2 years, identified some resources, some plans, things to move on. It is now a non-governmental task force that is continuing to meet, but we still have representatives on there. And what we've ultimately determined is we just don't have the resources needed, whether it's drug counseling, mental health counseling, just available affordable housing. You know, there's so many boxes that we're unable to check that we have. And it's a very popular area. You know, we are very familiar, our officers are very familiar with a lot of our homeless clients and people that we deal with. Some of them are there by choice, some are there due to mental health reasons. One of the directions we actually were given at the state level when COVID hit was to stop enforcing the transient camps because there was nowhere else for them to go. And the thought at the state level was it was best at that time to keep them in an area where they were able to be confined or able to social distance, whatever it may be. But again, there's a lot of them. And we know that generally where most of them are, we generally know most of the problems we have. I can tell you not a day goes by we don't have a call related to them. We throw whatever resources we can at them. We try to get voluntary compliance. So really about the best thing that we can do is, and I understand what you're talking about, Bob, is I drive that road also and I see them in camo clothing, or you come around a corner at Norman Road and there's somebody in dark clothes standing on the fog line. Is, you know, we really want our community to be aware that this is happening. We talk to them. Enforcement, you know, it is an option, but again, there's limited we can do besides writing a ticket, and then it's just kind of a perpetual motion where they don't have to appear in court. And if they don't appear in court, there may be some kind of sanctions that just continue. But again, there has to be a need and a want for them to comply. So again, a really long answer, but it's something we're trying. I hate to use this excuse, we just have limited resources.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you talk to these people?
Every day.
You do?
Every day, yep.
Okay. If I gave you 100 reflector vests, could you ask them to wear it when you stop and talk to those people?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
you know,
Road Driveway Company will donate 100 of those orange vests to you.
Okay. I think that's a great idea. Again, we can't make them wear them, but I think they want to be safe as anybody else.
Exactly.
They don't want to be hit by a car for whatever the condition. I really appreciate that. I'll talk to our staff knows just about every one of them by name. They have actually, our officers have a good relationship with them. Every once in a while we get new people in town and it takes a little bit to establish that relationship, but there's almost, I guess, kind of a mutual respect that, you know, they allow us to sit and talk to them, you know, to try to help work through these things. And our exchange is like, we can't keep you from doing this, but maybe if you could go do this at this location, or if you could go do it at that location. So okay, yeah, that's a great tool, and I'll be in touch with you about that.
Thank you very much.
Jason?
Well, good things happen at Rotary meetings. Thanks, Bob. That's a neat idea. I'm sure maybe it'll save a life or two.
Freddie, do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Jason, it's Doretta Smith. You probably gathered by now I live back behind Fred Meyer by the infamous heater cat. Anyway, we're having an issue with campers camping on the street at the mouth of our subdivision by the Fred Meyer, and there's a couple, 3 houses there, one with little kids. I've called and talked to various people and get different stories on how you're limited on what you can do. Don't really have a full understanding. Any chance you could bring us up to speed of why they're allowed to camp there and cook their dinners on their hoods of their truck day after day?
I can. It's actually a court ruling that came out of Boise, Idaho. There was some homeless that were issued citations for camping on public ground, and it went through the state system, and it ended up, I think, being a Ninth Circuit ruling where it was defined as cruel and unusual punishment if we were issuing people citations for ultimately being homeless. The opinion is much longer than that, and that is the simplified version of it. But we have sent this through our legal team, we have sent this through our insurance carrier, and the guidance that we have is we cannot keep people from public property, but we can keep right-of-ways open. And so if somebody is blocking a sidewalk, then we can ask them to move on. You can't really trespass somebody from public property without cause. And so we have an exclusion ordinance in Newport where if people are drinking in public or if they are fighting, engaging in tumultuous behavior, committing disorderly conduct, things like that, they can actually be excluded from certain public areas for 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the instance. So the people that where you're seeing a lot of people camping on City Hall lawns right now, near the bus shelter, kind of in the right-of-way area next to sidewalks, they're no longer on the sidewalks because they've been told they can't be there. But if they move that 2 feet into the bark dust area that's considered the right-of-way, not private property, we have zero authority to ask them to move on. Now we can talk to them, we can plead with them, and we can maybe suggest another place for them to go that is less intrusive. But as far as forcefulness of us being able to enforce or move them on is ultimately our hands have been tied by recent court rulings. And there was
Do they have to prove to you that they're homeless?
No, they do not. And because Newport does not have a homeless shelter, so if Newport had a homeless shelter, we can then enforce it if there is a place for them to go. If we had a designated, say, Dignity Village, which was a designated homeless camp, then we can use enforcement because there is a dedicated place for them to go. But the courts have ruled that because somebody doesn't have resources, doesn't have a house, doesn't have a place to go, enforcement is a violation of their 8th Amendment.
And I get that, but it's pretty apparent we're getting people camping who probably do have a home, and they're just not wanting to pay the campground fees. And the word on the street is you can basically park wherever and camp for the night. And so it seems to me you should have to prove that you're homeless.
Not that we've seen. One of the things that we've run into here over well, since about July is our campgrounds are full and our motels are full. And we're running into, we'll see a dozen motorhomes scattered across 101 or Highway 20. The milepost 2 on Highway 20, the large turnout out there, I think had 7 motorhomes in it the other day. And I know that our officers talked to ones in north of town who said, we have nowhere else to be. You know, there is nowhere to go. The state parks, you have to have reservations now, and then our local campgrounds have been full. So it's not making excuses, but again, it's tough when there's been really limited resources and so many people in town.
One of the things that I'm bothered by, I live by Doretta with the crazy cat, but on that street in front of Fred Meyer, because there's only a sidewalk that goes up to the second entrance at Fred Meyer, and there isn't a sidewalk coming west down the hill. When they park there, especially for children, and we have a very large population of kids in that neighborhood, as they walk down, it's impossible to see them because the motorhomes and the trucks and things shield them from view from oncoming traffic going up and down the hill. So it can get kind of dangerous. It can be dangerous for kids on bikes or adults on bikes. It can also be pretty dangerous as far as just little kids. You can't see them because they're hidden with that. So maybe it's something we could talk to the city about extending our sidewalks up both sides of that street. It would narrow the street a little bit, but it's a visual problem as well for pedestrians.
And I'll make sure our patrol officers know 20th Street's a frequently patrolled area. So, but we'll also just make sure we're paying a little extra attention, that if there's something we can do, we will. Again, the city is working on a car camping ordinance, which authorizes and allows car camping, but only in designated areas. And we're hoping that then when we find motorhomes, cars, whatever it may be in random areas of the city, is we can then direct them to a dedicated area that has facilities and services. So
are they allowed to have open cooking like that? Because the guy that was cooking out on the hood of his truck was right below the pine trees of the house that's there, and we're awfully dry right now. It's August, and I just don't understand why open flames are being allowed.
It actually came up not too long ago, and I talked to our fire chief about that. And if they're while we're in fire season and open fire pits are not allowed, open flame cooking is. And again, I don't understand all the state rules, but again, it's something we can keep an eye on. And if there's something we can help with, we will. But again, people have rights, and our job to support them.
So I have a question. We still have 6 minutes So Jason, you mentioned the importance of community input. So does the Newport Police Department have a citizen advisory group linked to the police department, or has there been talks or thoughts about that?
Thanks for bringing that up, Julie. There's a lot of talk and a lot of discussion. It was actually a council goal. It was something I know that Chief Miranda and I tried for quite a few years, and it's something we have to have city support of. And year before last, our city council, one of their goals was to establish a police advisory council or a police advisory group. And I was super excited about that. The minute I came back from the meeting, I wrote a draft, and I'm working with 2 of the councilors right now. And we have a department head for a city council work session scheduled for the first meeting in October to take the next steps to actually establishing a citizens advisory council. And it's going to be made up of citizens from Newport. I believe it actually goes into the urban growth areas, but it's our underrepresented community, our youth community, and just members of our community. We're trying to get a very diverse section so that everybody has input. So I'm really hoping.
Would people apply for that like they do for other city?
Yes. Well, I can tell you the draft that I wrote had an application process and a selection process. It's ultimately up to our council because it is a group that reports directly to our city council. But there will be some kind of selection process. There will be, I think, like most advisory councils, they're appointed by the mayor. So I'm excited for it. I'm really eager for it. And I'm hoping that this fall, we're going to have substantial steps of moving forward.
I'm glad you're doing that. I think that's a step in the right direction. And I just wanted to say, Robbie, real quick before we go, Robbie Wiener, you do not have to pay 20 to my Paul Harris. Save it and use it on the vests that your dad's doing.
I have a quick comment, real quick. Jason, I just want you to know that I think Officer Tom Lekas, who is the SRO, is by far the best one that I've seen in the 13 years that my kids have been in school, because he absolutely related to every kid. He would sign up for, like when we had a pie fundraiser, he signed up, volunteered to have himself pied in front of the school, like thrown a pie to the face. And he's a soccer coach. He will be missed in the schools if we ever open. But I just want to say that if we do get that back, please put him in there. He's awesome. So.
I think many would agree with you.
All right. Well, thanks, Chief Malloy. It was great having you with us today, and thanks for working so hard to keep our town safe. I think you're doing a great job with that. So as a thank you for presenting today, we're going to vaccinate 50 kids against polio in your name, which is a project Rotary's been working on for quite a while and getting pretty close to completing. So thank you.
Thank you. And Bob, I will get in touch with you about those vests soon.